Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We're just going to take a couple minutes here to make sure everybody can join. And thank you so much for being here today while we are with our wonderful, talented, accomplished authors with Bookshop. And we are going to give a little intro while everybody just kind of joins in the room for a couple minutes here. But we are, again, thrilled to have here our incredible panel as we work with Latinx Stories, Voices of Heritage. Again, thank you all for joining. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Bookshop for the next couple minutes, and then we'll hand it off to Rudy Ruiz, who is our moderator for this day's event. And each author is going to speak separately. They're going to have wonderful discussion amongst each other for the first about 40 minutes or so. And then Rudy is going to open it up to Q&A below. So just use the Q&A icon about halfway through to submit questions. And Rudy will open it up to those again about 40 to 45 minutes into the event. So thank you again to everybody for being here. So appreciated. And again, I'm going to give a little intro about Bookshop and then we'll hand it off after that. My name is Angela Januzzi. I work with marketing and special programs like this one here at Bookshop. And I just want to again say that we are recording this event, so it will be on YouTube and Bookshop's YouTube channel within a few days, so you can see it there as well. And again, when Rudy opens up to questions halfway through, we're going to be vetting them in real time, so apologies ahead of time if your question is not answered. We're going to do our best to answer all of them, but just please note that they may not all be able to be responded to, and we really appreciate your understanding for that too. So just a word about Bookshop first, and then we'll hand it off to our wonderful author panel. Bookshop is directly dedicated to supporting independent bookstores. Every purchase you make on bookshop.org directly benefits local and independent bookstores. We have a mission to financially support these stores because we believe that bookstores are essential to a healthy culture. They're where authors can connect with readers, where we discover new writers, and where children get hooked on the thrill of reading that can last a lifetime. They're also anchors for our downtowns and our communities. As more and more people buy books online, even before quarantine happened, we wanted to create an easy, convenient way for you to get your books and support bookstores at the same time, especially for those stores whose e-commerce capacity and inventory space we help supplement. As a standard, we at Bookshop always encourage customers to buy books directly from a local bookstore whenever possible. If for some reason you cannot do so, then you can come to Bookshop. You'll find your local store and more stores on our map, on our websites, and they will receive the full profit off your order. Otherwise, your order will instead contribute to an earnings pool that will be evenly distributed among independent bookstores, even those who don't use Bookshop. We also support anyone who advocates for books through our affiliate program, which pays a 10% commission on every sale and gives a matching 10% to independent bookstores as well. So if you're an author, if you're a website or a magazine, if you have a book club, if you're an organization who likes to recommend books, or if you're someone with an Instagram feed or not an Instagram feed, please sign up. You can be an affiliate for free. You start your own shop and you're rewarded for your advocacy of books. Bookshop wants to give back to everyone who promotes books, authors, and independent bookstores. By design, we give away over 75% of our profit margin to stores, publications, authors, and others who make up the thriving and inspirational culture around books. We hope that Bookshop can strengthen the fragile ecosystem of the margins around bookselling and keep local bookstores an integral part of our culture and our communities. Bookshop is a B Corp, a corporation dedicated to public good. So now for introduction of our 5 accomplished guests today, the reason you are all here. Please note these bios are shortened in the interest of time and yet still somehow incredibly impressive, even in their edited versions. First, Rudy Ruiz is today's moderator, is the author of The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez, which received a Booklist Starred Review, and also author of 7 for the Revolution, winner of 4 International Latino Book Awards. He earned his bachelor's and master's degrees at Harvard, where his studies included literature and creative writing. And we want to say thank you again to Rudy for initiating this event and starting to help organize it. Cecilia Aragon is a Seattle author, pilot, and first Latina full professor in the College of Engineering at the University of Washington. Her memoir, Flying Free, My Victory Over Fear to Become the First Latina Pilot in the U.S. Aerobatic Team, lifts readers into the skies on her epic journey from fearful bully child to champion pilot. It's an incredible true story. Her major awards for research and a stint at NASA designing software for Mars missions led President Obama to call her, quote, one of the top scientists and engineers in the country. Jennifer Givhan is a Mexican-American writer and activist, the author of several novels and books. Jubilee is out now, and Trinity Sight is her other novel, as well as 4 full-length poetry collections, most recently Rose's Einstein, and 2 chapbooks. She has received, among other honors, major honors, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a Penn Rosenthal Emerging Voices Fellowship, New Ohio Review's Poetry Prize, chosen by Tehemba Jess. Givhan also holds a master's degree in English from California State University Fullerton and an MFA from Warren Wilson College. Alex Temblador is the author of The Secrets of Casa Rosada, which received multiple awards, including the NACCS Teas Foco Young Adult Fiction Award for Kirkus Review's Best YA Books. Oh, and Kirkus Review's Best YA Books. And again, I'm cutting out many awards and honors from these bios as well in the interest of time. Her second book, Half Outlaw, is forthcoming adult fiction, and Alex lives and works in Dallas, Texas as the organizer of the author series Lit Talk. So please check out that series too. A public speaker, a freelance writer, and a creative writing instructor. And finally, Sergio Troncoso is author of A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son, winner of the Kay Cattrall Award for Best Short Story and Best Short Story Collection from the International Latino Book Awards. Other books of his include From This Wicked Patch of Dust, which was the winner of the Southwest Book Award and recipient of a Kirkus Starred Review and a Best Book of 2012, Crossing Borders, which was Forward Review's Bronze Award for Essays winner, The Nature of Truth, and The Last Tortilla and Other Stories. A Fulbright Scholar, he has served as a judge for the PEN/Faulkner Award for Fiction and New Letters Prize for Essays, and he is currently president of the Texas Institute for Letters. So again, what an incredible panel we have here today. And again, those bios were all shortened in the interest of time. Thank you so much again for joining us and for considering purchasing our author's most recent books from Bookshop in the links we share after the event and in our emails afterwards. So again, Rudy, I'm going to hand it off to you. I'll be here in a Bookshop Black floating box and gallery view and vetting the questions around 40 to 45 minutes in. So thank you again. And I'm going to go off screen and disappear for a bit as you all have a wonderful conversation. So thank you for unmuting and appreciate all your time again.
Thank you, Angela. Appreciate it. And thanks to all my fellow authors here for taking the time to be together on the last day of Latinx Heritage Month, which I think it's always an exciting opportunity or time to celebrate our culture, our roots, and share those with other people and other audiences. So thanks to the readers who've shown up today to kind of listen to us chat about what our heritage means to us and how it kind of ties into our work as writers. Just to give our audience a little overview, each author is going to speak for a couple minutes about their recent work, and then I'm going to jump in and maybe ask a question or two. And if there's time, the other authors can kind of jump in and converse as well. We're hoping to give each author about 5 to 7 minutes of time to talk about their work before we move on to the next author. So I'll have to jump in at that point if necessary. But then at the end, after we've all chatted a little bit, as Angela mentioned, we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So again, special thanks to Bookshop. I know this is their first Latinx Heritage Month event, so it's exciting to be a part of that. And also thanks to Blackstone Publishing for supporting the event as well. So our first author that we're going to start out with is Jen. So Jen, if you want to just share a little bit with us about your current book.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rudy, and everyone else for being here. So my current book is Jubilee, and that's out from Blackstone this month. And it's about a young woman named Bianca who comes home to her brother's house in Santa Ana, which is in Orange County, but it's kind of like the Latinx cultural center of Orange County and very different from Orange County. And I wanted to highlight that as well. But she's come up from the border of Mexicali where she grew up, and she's exhausted, she's bruised, she's bleeding. Her brother doesn't know what's wrong with her. She's carrying a baby, and she hands the baby over to her brother before she passes out and needs to be taken to the emergency room. And her brother immediately realizes that there's a lot more going on here than just physical trauma, because when he looks down, he sees that the baby is a doll. And then from that point on, the story breaks into two timelines and goes back to the Mexicali border where she grew up to hear the past year of how she got to this point on her brother's doorstep. And then the present timeline, which is the year following this trauma and as she's trying to heal. And so it lends a perspective to mental illness that I haven't really seen very often portrayed in literature, especially in the Latinx community, which is so focused on family. And I mean, that's really at the heart of my story. And so it doesn't take place as much in therapy sessions or in hospitals as much as it does in the home and with the family, and how her family really helps her through this trauma. So yeah, so that's a little bit about Jubilee.
Thanks, Jen. I noticed that both in Jubilee and your previous novel, Trainer Decide, motherhood seems to be like a motif. And certainly in the Latinx culture, I mean, mothers are sort of the matriarch, is just such a huge part of the family. But I noticed that you also, the way you've approached it is very much outside of the cultural stereotypes, within the culture. So tell us a little bit about that, like kind of what's inspired you to, explore motherhood, but outside of the traditional sort of definition of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, my mother really was the most important figure in my life. And I saw how, growing up, she grew up in the 1960s and 70s and really wasn't encouraged to go to school, and really wasn't even allowed to. And she got married as a way to get out of her house, and start her family. And but then, even as I was born and my brothers were born, she worked her way through nursing school and became an RN. And so I watched her go all that way. And then even as I graduated from college, she went back to college and got her master's in nursing and then her doctorate in nursing when she was about 60 years old. And so, so I was seeing both sides, I guess, of the pressures on mothers, especially in the Latinx community, where there are, some lingering cultural stigmas, and as well as that drive to really, push ourselves forward as women as well. And so I wanted to convey that in my speakers. I mean, well, I write poetry as well, so I mean protagonist here, but in my protagonist, in that I wanted to show that motherhood is still potentially an impetus that is strong in women and in the Latinx community, and that we're, I write very feminist books, but I don't want to convey that motherhood isn't still, a revered and honorable, aspect of our lives. And so I wanted motherhood to be central, but I also wanted to show mothers who are not perfect, mothers who are struggling, and not in just the ways that the Latinx community has traditionally been shown, but, with our complexities outside of just that traditional mainstream narrative of what people think when they think of Latinx community. And so, I do have mothers who struggle with mental illness. I do have mothers who struggle with, whether or not they're a good mom, whether or not, they can handle all of the cultural baggage that's placed upon them. And that's really a central aspect of my own life too, as a writer and a mother. That's something that I'm just in the trenches now. My kids are 10 and 13, and I started writing really seriously when they were born. So it's just been pouring my experiences of child rearing while trying to build a career without very much support from society. You know, there's a lot of lip service given to motherhood, but the concrete, tangible support is not always there. And so in the Latinx community, typically family tends to be there, and that's been the case in my experience, that I've relied on family time and time again. But so I wanted to convey a sense of that. Yeah, thank you.
I love that. I think it makes, you know, it's an interesting part of exploring our culture is also, to me as a writer, is exploring how it's evolving and how it's changing. And, you know, I think I mean, motherhood in the Latino culture is so, you know, tied up with concepts like, I don't want to throw anyone in the audience for a loop, but like Marianismo, which I'm sure, you know, all of us have heard about, and this concept of the mother as just sacrificing everything, you know, constantly. And that's sort of what generally tends to be expected from them within historically the culture. But at the same time, you know, we're the Latinx community in the United States and evolving and, you know, trying to change and also trying to allow everybody to be fulfilled. And also at the same time, I mean, talk about having one's plate full as a mother, meeting all those expectations from family and older members of the older generations, but then also trying to inspire the next generation to, you know, open up those boundaries and tear down those boundaries and allow everyone to reach their full potential. So it's fascinating stuff. Any other of the author panel have any comments or questions for Jen before we move on to Cecilia? Okay, well, we'll come back to you again, Jen, in a little bit, and thank you for sharing. Cecilia, your book is called Flying Free, and why don't you share with us a little bit about your experience writing it and what it's about.
Well, thanks so much, Rudy, and thanks to everyone for being here. I'm really thrilled to be part of this distinguished panel. My book, Flying Free, is my debut memoir. It's the story of how a very shy and amazingly timid daughter of immigrants with terrible phobias overcame her fears to become the first Latina pilot on the United States aerobatic team. And that's an aviation team, and I flew and represented the US in the Olympics of Aviation, the World Aerobatic Championships. And what makes it really surprising is that I was the last person and you know that anybody would have expected would do something so crazy as fly an airplane upside down. I was a very physically timid child. I was afraid of heights. I was even scared of elevators and escalators. I mean, you name it, I was afraid. And I wrote the book, first of all, because I think it's a cool story, and I think it addresses a narrative. It's a counter narrative to what people often believe about Latinx people today. I know, so I grew up in a small town in Indiana as the daughter of adult immigrants to the United States. And I experienced, you know, they denied us service in stores. You know, one guy told me, well, I don't have anything against you, but I could never date you because my parents think that, you know, that they only see names like yours in the police blotters and on the fields. And so I wanted to emphasize that, you know, Latinx people are not, you know, we're not just struggling and poor and suffering, although of course many of us are, but also that we can achieve anything and we can reach heights that, you know, we should not be limited either by our cultural expectations, as, you know, as Jen talked so movingly about motherhood, right? So I'm a mother too, so I really relate to your story. I want to buy your book now, Jen. But I think there's really an important message today, and this is why I wrote the book. It actually took me 20 years to write. So I think there's an important message for anyone who's dreamed of doing something, but stopped themselves because of fear or insecurity or lack of confidence. So young women who want to be scientists, but allow themselves to be convinced, oh, I'm not good at math. You know, Latinx people like me who've been told either overtly or subliminally that we're inferior. And anyone really, I mean, anyone who has ever been told by a screwed up system that we have in the United States that we are not good enough. I want people to read this book and feel activated to change themselves and the world around them.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's inspiring. Yeah, that's wonderful. And I mean, you know, I was just thinking about what you described. You know, you were already starting out in life with all these obstacles. I mean, people were telling you that you weren't good enough or couldn't do some of the basic things that pretty much everybody does, right? Yet you chose the careers of being a scientist and a pilot, and you know, and now a writer, which are careers that, you know, Latinx people and women are traditionally underrepresented in and face insurmountable, seemingly insurmountable obstacles. So what was there something that drew you specifically to these extra challenging careers, even when you were already being told like, hey, you can't even eat in this restaurant?
Well, thank you for asking that, Rudy. So first of all, I do want to make it clear that I was very privileged and fortunate to have two parents who really believed in me. And they when my teachers said things like, oh, you must be plagiarizing if I wrote an essay that had, that was very articulate, they would say, someone like you can't possibly have this vocabulary, right? And my parents always supported me and told me that teacher is wrong. And, it really only takes one voice. And I was lucky that I had those parents, but if people don't, not everybody does. That's why I became a teacher and a professor, was to be that one voice for my students, particularly Latinx students. So why did I go into this? Well, for one thing, all right, so I want to say math is a magic trick. It is wonderful. There's nothing that, can change the world. I go into a room, I'm a small woman, I'm a Latina, and I silence the room with my skill at numbers. It is so powerful. So doing something like that is just a fantastic option for kids today. And don't let people believe you. Don't let people tell you, oh, I'm not good at math. Because just because something is hard doesn't mean you're not good at it. I had difficulties with math. I had difficulties with flying, a lot of difficulties with flying. I was one of the worst flying students that my instructors ever had. But it's something that you should push yourself. I believe very strongly it's important, particularly in this society today, if you are in an underrepresented group, if you are being told by the majority that you're not good enough, that you push yourself to do something difficult and to achieve something spectacular. And the advantage of math is that, when you get the answer right, nobody can tell you you're wrong. I can't tell you the number of times I was graded down for my writing or my art by a teacher that was really, to be fair, racist. But with math, there's nothing they could do. If I got the answers right, if I got 100% on a test, they had to give it to me. And that is so powerful. That's the power of math and science.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, I think that's great. No, I think that's great for people to hear, and you're right. When you're in fields that are so objective, I mean, it levels the playing field, so to speak. And that's interesting. Well, what an amazing role model you are for young people out there who want to go into these fields where, maybe they'd be the only person in their class doing so, but you give them hope and inspiration. So thank you. So I'm sure we'll have more questions for you, but unfortunately, just to stay on track, I will now cede the floor to Alex Temblador to talk a little bit about her work. Alex, you'll just need to unmute there. And
My bad. Hi, my name is Alex Temblador, and I am the author of Secrets of the Casa Rosada. This was my debut fiction novel. It is young adult. It's set down in Laredo, Texas, which is in the border area of Texas, and it focuses on Martha, who is 16 years old, and in the very beginning of the book, she's abandoned by her mother with a grandmother she's never met, who only speaks Spanish, and Martha doesn't speak Spanish. And this grandmother is also a curandera, and if you're part of the Latinx community, you know these are Hispanic or Latinx folk healers. They sometimes kind of play the role that doctors did in rural communities or in communities where people don't feel comfortable going to the doctor. And really the whole story is kind of looking at family secrets and how those things can be poisonous to within your family. And so that's my first book. It came out in 2018. It's done pretty well. Blackstone Publishing just acquired my second book. It will be adult fiction and hopefully out in 2022. But it focuses on a main character who is half Mexican, half white, like I am. And Rocky really dives into her past, where she was raised by a white racist motorcycle club uncle in California and has to take a journey after he passes away through the US on his drug routes to kind of see all these people on his funeral ride, and she kind of gets a new perspective of her life, and then looks at both sides of her culture, because she does have an opportunity to connect with her Mexican American side on that trip. So that's a little bit about my two stories.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, you know, I was excited when I was reading about the secrets of the Casa Rosada, that you had chosen the border as the setting. As a border native, we got a couple border natives here. Sergio's also a border native. I was just curious right off the bat. I know you grew up in Wichita Falls, Texas. You went to Central Oklahoma University for your master's in fine arts. And I think you live in Dallas, Texas now, or Dallas-Fort Worth area, right? So I was curious what drew you to the border for the setting of your story, and also like if you spent time down the border in the process, and kind of what inspired you about the border, I guess. As a border native, it intrigued me I was curious.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I'm half Mexican, half white. And my dad's side is Mexican American. It depends on which side you look at. We're like 4th to 6th generation American, but of Mexican heritage. And my dad's father is from California. So living in Texas, we didn't really see that side of the family. So I couldn't connect my Mexican heritage that way. But my dad's mother, my grandmother, is from Laredo, Texas, and all of her family is from there. So when I was thinking about writing a story in which my main character is diving into her Mexican heritage for the first time in her life, I was kind of going through the same thing as a young adult at the time. And that for me was the border. That was Laredo, Texas. That's where all my family is from. We would visit when I was a kid, and it was pretty clear to me kind of the difference in the way I was brought up. The culture, being a mixed kid, you know, it's a very different experience being half Mexican, half white than it is maybe how my cousins grew up in Laredo, Texas. So I really wanted to dive into what that heritage meant to me, and that was going to be in Laredo, Texas. It's this place that is in itself kind of mixed. It's on the border, so it's between two geographic locations in the US. It's a place of contention at times, but it's a beautiful place where a lot of cultures come together. They have a lot of big American patriotic spirit in that they celebrate like George Washington's birthday for like a month and a half, which I don't think anywhere else in the US does that. So I really wanted to feature Laredo in this story. And yeah, I was excited to do it. While I was writing the book, I went down there to kind of make sure everything I remembered was correct. And I'm actually going next week. So I can't wait to be in the border area again. I'm going to be really safe, I promise. But I'm excited to visit my great grandparents' grave sites and kind of see some family, very social distancing while I'm down there.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Yeah, you know, I think that when you talk about that, it's a reminder to me that like the sense of place is so important and so prevalent in a lot of Latinx writing. You know, where we have a lot of feelings, memories associated with either the places we grew up, or maybe it's the places that our parents or grandparents grew up, and we heard stories about those places. You know, as we were kids growing up, and then I find myself like relating some of those stories now to my kids, or going back to, you know, a lot of those old stories in my own writing, and sort of repurposing them or exploring them. Which right now, when we can't travel as much as we used to, and can't travel internationally as much, I think some of the books that we have, you know, amongst us here are almost like a way of traveling vicariously through characters and stories.
Absolutely.
And I saw that you've been successful as a travel writer as well. So I was curious how that has informed your view of culture and heritage.
Yeah, so I've been traveling around the world for maybe the past 4 years consistently. Before the pandemic, I would take a trip once or twice a month. They were sponsored, you know, that was part of my job, was to take these trips, experiences the places, and then write for national and international magazines. And I think one of the most important things that I learned while I am traveling the world is that the view of Latinx cultures is very different in different countries. And I'm not just talking in like Latinx countries or Latin American countries or South American countries or Central America. I'm talking about in Europe and Asia. They have a very different perspective of Latinx community and the heritage and the culture than we even have in the US. That to me was kind of an eye-opener. I didn't feel like the stereotypes that we have in the US about Latinx communities are as prevalent in other countries. And you were able to kind of discuss culture and community with different, or I was with different people around the world, and I would share mine. They were excited to learn about it. They were excited to read my books. I mean, I would go, you know, to Asia, and they're like, "Can I buy your book here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think, you know, online." But I feel like at least with my book, and this is one of the things I was trying to do, and I always try to do as a writer, you don't have to be a part of the Latinx community to read my book. I think there's this idea that people don't want to buy books from authors that look different from them or come from different backgrounds. But I always want to write stories in which people can learn about my culture and community. They can get some insight and really discover that we're all pretty similar in a lot of ways. And so that's why I always focus a lot of my stories on family, because we all have like families, whether, you know, you have big or small ones, they tend to have secrets, they tend to have some drama, they tend to have a lot of love, whether you create your own family or you know, you were born in it. So yeah.
That's great. That's really interesting to hear how we're perceived as a community being different, you know, depending on where you are in the world, how it's seen. That's fascinating. And it's very interesting. I mean, I hope over time, you know, through writers such as ourselves and our other colleagues out there, and readers who are willing to explore different cultures, like we can get to that place in America where more people can realize that celebrating individual cultures doesn't mean excluding ourselves from the broader fabric of America, and that all these different cultures just make the overall tapestry of America just richer and more beautiful, you know? So
agreed. Yeah,
so
like when I was in Serbia, I would see people salsa dancing in the square. They really like Mexicans a lot. They had a ton of Mexican food in Belgrade, which like freaked me out. I was like, why is there burrito shops on every corner?
That's awesome.
So it's fun to learn about, like, to see your culture in other countries and them getting excited to like talk to you about the things they like about your culture.
Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing, Alex.
Thank you.
And we'll come back to you again in the Q&A, and now we'll switch gears and welcome Sergio Troncoso to speak about his recent work, A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son. Sergio.
Thank you, Rudy. So this is my sixth book, and it's a collection of short stories all around the theme of immigration and immigrants. And so you have different stories like Jimena Garza, who's a Guatemalan immigrant in New York City, trying to get help from a policeman who does not know Spanish, and Jimena only knows Spanish, for her abusive husband at home, to an immigrant that has, quote unquote, made it, David Calderon in the first story, Rosary on the Border, who has gotten a PhD, who lives in Connecticut and supposedly makes it, but then he's having clashes with people who are questioning, why are you here? Why are you in fact doing better than some of us here in Connecticut? And so it never really goes away. So this range of different immigrants within this country, not just on the border, because I was very purposeful about that. I wanted to write stories in which immigrants are deep in the United States, in places that are not typical, like along the border. And they're Mexicanos, there's Guatemaltecos, they're you know, all sorts of different immigrants. And but one of the other things that I do, and anyone who knows my work will know this, is I'm heavily into philosophy. One of my graduate degrees is in philosophy from Yale, and so these 13 stories are all grouped in twos and threes. If you see the table of contents, you'll see them. And I'm heavily into perspectivism. I studied German philosophy and Friedrich Nietzsche and Heidegger and Wittgenstein, among others. And so I'm one of these crazy Latinos that mixes philosophy with literature. And I'm always trying to break stereotypes. You know, isn't it shocking that some Latinos can actually think? So I was always interested in you know, throwing a grenade into the places where I was at. And so these 13 stories, a character will appear in one story, like David Calderon in the first story, and from a certain angle, and then from the next story, David will appear from a very different perspective. And this happens with Jimena, this happens with different characters in the collection. And I'm really trying to get at this idea of we are many different selves. We are the self we project. We are the self internally at our homes. We are the self we hide. Just like I am that same guy who grew up in El Paso, and I had an outhouse in the backyard, and we dug our own, you know, our own trenches to connect to the water lines in an adobe house that my mother still lives in. And now I'm a guy who teaches at Yale. And you know, and everything in between that. So for me, it was getting into this idea of perspectivism. And toward the end, the stories start realistically. They're all realistic stories, and then as the collection continues, they go into surrealism and even a dystopia. And so at a certain point, the reader and narrator herself becomes a character in the story, because perspectivism also affects the reader bringing his or her own software into appreciating a character, or actually disliking the character from the get-go. So I'm trying to make the reader self-conscious about what she brings into a story. Because it's not, you know, we assume we just write a story and you know, it is what we want it to be. No, but every reader is going to interpret and experience that story and those characters in very different ways. So it gets into sort of issues of perspectivism in a real, you know, way that I think has always been very interesting for me. Anyway, that's kind of what the collection's about.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, it sounds very ambitious and very eye-opening. You know, I love that concept of how you know, the individual, the character, or you know, today we're talking about culture. It is not only existing from the perspective of that character. You know, it's existing from all these multiple perspectives. Including the reader. Like that's
right.
That's really great. One of the things that struck me when I was reading one of the short stories, The Rosary on the Border, that won the best short story award, the Kay Catrula short story award from the Texas Institute of Letters. it kind of, I feel like that story captured a little bit of what you're describing, of where sometimes the same individual at different stages of their life comes to see themselves from these different perspectives, and kind of sort of capture how our own identity is always evolving or changing, especially when you go from such extremes as what you've described, an upbringing as the son of immigrants or daughter of immigrants living in a relatively economically challenging circumstance, to success, you know, on American terms. And I think, like in Hispanic culture, one of the things that's always fascinated me about that is acculturation gaps, and kind of how we struggle with those sometimes between the generations, because the generational experiences are so vastly different, which is something that really came through in that story for me. I'm just curious, because I know because of your background in philosophy, I know you're working to universalize these experiences, and I wonder how in your thinking, readers that are outside of the culture, or that didn't have that kind of acculturation gap experience, like how they interpret it, or what it means to them, or how it universalizes beyond the immigrant community.
Well, you know, that's a really good question, Rudy. I think how it universalizes in my mind is that we all, as we're trying to find our place in our community, whether you're Mexicano or Boricua, or, you know, Dominicano or Guatemalteco, you know, in some ways you leave our family, but you keep it very deep within you. And that goes to Irish immigrants, Jewish immigrants, that goes to anybody who you know, who came to this country. And so you know, just like I think all of us, some of the, you know, my father, I would call him our Stalin Moses. He worked us to death. We were the kids, oh my God, you know, we would be cleaning out the irrigation canals behind our house, and we didn't own these irrigation canals because he said it's good for you. But this is like how he took us from like pre-industrial agrarian society within our family to where we are. So we learned to work our butts off. And then, so those values helped me survive, helped me, you know, when I arrived at Harvard and I was clueless, and I showed up with Led Zeppelin t-shirts and bell-bottom jeans, and had never been to Massachusetts, much less the Ivy League. But those values helped me. But other things like the machismo, I did not like. You know, the way he sometimes treated my mother. You know, my heroes in my family were my mother, and especially my abuelita, who had shot and killed 2 men who attempted to rape her during the Mexican Revolution. She was this tough as nails viejita who would kick your butt if you confronted her. And I learned so much about surviving, you know, from her in surviving in the Ivy League. And so for me, communicating these values, the things, especially the ones that came from our Latinx heritage, and how they could be adapted to values in the Northeast, to values where we're not supposed to be, or like Cecilia, in a math science, you know, gauntlet and fight. That's what was mattered to me, and that's what I tried to do in this collection, you know, and through immigrants, you know, showing the things that we're keeping, and then the things that we're also adapting and changing for our new life here in this country, and getting deep in the fabric of the United States, which I believe in.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, thank you for your insights into that, Sergio, and how your personal experience, you know, has inspired your view of those issues. Well, you know, we're getting to that question and answer part of time, and I haven't talked about my own. I haven't talked about my own book, but Alex, did you have a comment or question?
I had a question for you after you talk about your own book. I'm going to ask you something about your book.
Okay. Well, I'll make mine very brief because I want to leave time for the Q&A. But some of the themes that all of you have touched on, I feel like relate to my book. My novel is called The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez, which is right here. It's set on the border. I created a sort of a mythical town called La Frontera, And it's inspired by border towns, like the one I grew up in. Was born and raised in Brownsville, Texas, and Matamoros, Mexico, places like Laredo and El Paso. And I just wanted to create a more sort of universal border town. One of my great inspirations, favorite, authors that inspired me to want to be an author was Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and I just always loved Macondo, his mythical town in 100 Years of Solitude. And I always wanted to see a magical realism story like the ones that he wrote, set in the United States with Latinx characters that were going through the immigrant experience, and so forth. And so that's what I set out to do with the novel. It's also a love story, and it follows this protagonist, Fulgencio Ramirez, who was largely inspired by stories of my own father growing up in the 1950s in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, and being the first in his family, being the son of impoverished immigrants. His dad had been orphaned during the Mexican Revolution. His mom was an orphan too from the same era. And him being the first one in his family to go to college, and him aspiring to the American dream and so forth. But in the story, he's fighting a curse, this sort of maldición, as we call it in the story, but it's a curse that haunts the men in his family. And in many ways, that curse, Sergio, you mentioned machismo as one of the challenges, like in the Latinx culture. By no means did I want to be stereotypical about it, but I grew up in that type of situation where I saw how machismo had a negative impact on the relationship between my mother and father. How as Sergio mentioned, I didn't like how my father treated my mother oftentimes, and I didn't like a lot of aspects of that view of the world. And I saw how it caused a lot of problems for him personally, and how it became in many ways an obstacle to his own fulfillment, both on the family relationship level to the professional level, because machismo is not just the man versus woman dynamic, but the man versus the world dynamic, of not being able to accept that you're wrong ever or change. So it was something that I wanted to explore, and I kind of tried to generalize it a little bit with tying it to a curse that he was trying to overcome. But it's really about personal growth and trying to change, and trying to overcome the obstacles inside yourself. So that's a little bit about the resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez. I don't want to spend too much talking about myself. I'd love to open it up to Q&A. I know we're getting some questions. Alex, I'll let you ask the first question, and then maybe we can go to the questions that are queuing up for us from the audience.
Yeah, so you mentioned Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He is one of the most famous people known for magical realism. Magical realism is a long Latinx literary tradition. What did magical realism do for your novel, and how does it feel to be a part of this very strong tradition? Which I'm glad to be one of your fellow magical realism writers too.
Well, that's a great question. Thank you. I mean, it's both it's sort of an inspiring style for me personally. Like, I like writing in it because I love writing for many reasons. I love to be able to capture and reflect what's going on in reality and the problems that we're facing, and to advocate for things I believe in and comment on them. But I also like reading for escape, just like a lot of readers. I mean, we all have see problems every day in the news. We have problems in our everyday lives, and so there's a part of reading that I love that is a chance to relax and escape into a different world and have fun. And to me, magical realism sort of magically combined all that. It's it's real. You're commenting on real life, but then you're also experiencing some things that it's like you wish life was like this. You wish you could just sit down and talk to your abuelita again, or your dad again, and so forth, even though they've passed into the next dimension, so to speak. And magical realism lets you play with all those things. And for me, culturally, I just felt growing up, when I read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, I thought, wow, this is I get this, I feel this. I like so many students, I was growing up, going to school in the United States, reading a lot of great literature that a lot of times I feel like I read it, but I didn't fully understand it, and I didn't fully connect to it emotionally. And for me, magical realism was sort of a different, it got me into a different level relationship with literature and writing. So I love it. I enjoy it. And thanks for the question. I'm always glad to read, happy to read other writers who are trying it too. And the reason I say it's daunting is because when you do have great titans of literature like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, you know, it's tough to go into that genre and feel like you can ever do it justice. But, you know, like Cecilia told us earlier, right? You got to take some risks if you want to accomplish something.
Agreed. Thank you so much for answering that.
Thank you. So we have about nine or 10 minutes or so, and we have some questions piling up from the audience. So I will maybe verbalize one of them here. I'm not sure technologically, I think maybe everybody can see them. So one of the first ones here is, what is one story, fictional or otherwise, from your childhood that still resonates with you? And has it in any way influenced your writing style today? Anybody want to take a crack at that one?
Well, I have one. You know, for me, it was S.E. Hinton, you know, The Outsiders, as a kid in Isleta, right on the border, because, you know, that was kind of my life, the gang warfare. I mean, that was Barraca contra Calavera in Isleta. And that was like the first book that I felt I saw myself in it. I mean, it wasn't Chicano characters or Mexican characters, but it was the West, and it was these poor kids who, you know, really tried to live their lives in some in a good way, some terribly, but that was, I think, a story that really resonated for me. And just on the craft aspect, I think the simplicity of her writing and how powerful it was. What mattered in S.E. Hinton's work was the emotions that she communicated, not the fancy pyrotechnics. And by the way, she hit her name. You know, she was a woman who wanted to write for boys, and it became a great book, and it worked. It certainly worked for this boy.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's yeah. I love reading those books when I was like in middle school and high school. The S.E. Hinton books. Yeah, they are great. And like you said, interesting there how you can draw universal experiences that apply to people of all different races and ethnicities. So anyone else want to weigh in on that question, or shall I go on to the next one of the next questions? Okay. So we have an interesting question here. You know, what opinions do you all have about white authors who want to properly and respectfully include Black, Indigenous, and people of color characters in their work because they'd hate to whitewash or ignore the injustices of the world? Obviously, stories of heritage should be written by #OwnVoices authors like yourselves, but how can white authors nevertheless write good stories that include issues of race and racial injustice, though perhaps aren't centered on this? And I think that's a great question. I mean, it's a tough one because, you know, obviously it's a sensitive issue, but this year before COVID sort of took over the entire world news, that in the literary world, this was an issue that earlier in the year really popped up when the novel American Dirt came out, and there was a lot of controversy. So I'm curious, I'd love to hear from anyone on the panel what you guys think about this issue and how you deal with it, writing as well from our perspective about characters that are outside of the Latinx community.
I can take this one. I think for a long time, I'm kind of torn between the two, right? I want to see more own voices authors getting published by small, large, and medium publishers, because for a long time we haven't been able to tell our own stories. There are actually still more stories being told by people who are not own voices about our cultures and communities and ethnic identities. That can be frustrating. That's on the publisher. That's my problem is with the publishing industry. If you are a writer, I taught a class with Writers League of Texas kind of on this entire subject. If you're an author, a white author, or somebody who of any identity, and you're trying to write somebody of a different identity, it's going to take a lot of work. For me, I think you can do it. I think I mean, I write articles in which I talk about people of different identities all the time, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of research. It takes embedding yourself into those communities and giving them the proper respect and the proper time to learn about their cultures and the issues that they face and the experiences they have within their families, the language that they use. If you're not prepared to do all that work and then still be prepared to get negative feedback, because you might get negative feedback, whether you're doing it with good intentions or not. That might not be something that is for you. I think it's absolutely necessary to portray the world as it is in social justice issues within your stories. So don't be afraid to talk about those things. But do your homework, do your research, use, what do you call them, sensitivity readers. You need to use sensitivity readers. You should pay your sensitivity readers. That's necessary and important to get the best work. So yeah, I hope that kind of answered it.
Yeah, so that's a great answer. You covered almost everything I wanted to say, except I wanted to give a wonderful resource for people doing this. There's an excellent book called Writing the Other by Nissi Shaw that I recommend to everybody to read. It's how do you write about somebody whose life is not yours. But yeah, do everything Alex said as well.
Great. I think that's all great advice. And going along the theme of advice, because we're running out of time and there's so many good questions, but there was one question here that's a little bit along the lines of advice, which was, question was, any advice for aspiring Latinx or other Black, Indigenous, or people of color that are writers or poets? I know, Sergio, you have devoted a lot of your time to also teaching and being a mentor. And I believe several of you have taught as well. So I'm curious, I'll start with you, Sergio, but then anybody else who wants to give a piece of advice to young aspiring writers out there, facing challenges.
I think that, the first reason I love teaching is because I see myself in my students who are, a version of myself, especially, the young Latinx students that I get. And so the piece of advice I would give them first is you have to read voraciously. And I mean, not just, if you're not reading a minimum of 2 or 3 books a week, you're not even there. So and I mean, read voraciously, not just within Latinx literature, but German literature, Russian literature, Chinese literature, because the more you read and take apart what you're reading, the more you'll develop your literary aesthetic. And that's what you really want. When I was a judge for the Penn Faulkners, we had a record 493 books that we had to read in 9 months. That's about 2 books a day. And I was reading 15 to 18 hours per day. And you're paid to basically wipe your calendar to do this. And that's crazy. And by the way, I wrote a story about it, which is in the collection. But once I did that, I could tell within a first paragraph or 2 of any book I was reading that was already published what the mistakes were.
Wow.
And that's what you want to do to your own work. So one piece of advice would be to read voraciously. The other little piece of advice I would tell them is, and this is a little, risque, but I would say you got to become a rewriter. And most young writers think they fart gold. You do not fart gold. When you write that first draft, you got to rewrite it, and you got to take it apart. And I don't mean just a few sentences here and there. So that's kind of, we can get it more into it, but that's, I want to let other people talk, but that's one of the 2 pieces of advice I would give to young writers.
Well, thank you, Sergio. I think we all need to hear that memorable line once in a while.
Can I just add one thing? Is not all writers feel that way. I know I thought everything I wrote was terrible. So I would like to say that if you're one of those people, keep rewriting as well, but don't give up. And also don't give up, the publishing industry is overwhelmingly white. I mean, this is just a known fact if you look at the statistics. And I had a story rejected because it wasn't ethnic enough. You know,
Wow.
I mean, so it still is an issue, and just don't give up and don't let others define your notion of the quality of your writing. So for me, I would have liked to know that gold, I'm not going to say that word, but sorry. The gold came out of my rear end, but I have not gotten to that point yet.
That's wonderful. Well, yeah, I think that's all great advice. I mean, so, you know, read as much as we can and keep rewriting, and don't give up. I mean, like, those are all fantastic pieces of advice. And unfortunately, we're out of time, and there were some great questions there, you know, still left unanswered. But I want to thank you all for your time preparing for this and being here with me today. I mean, it's a real honor. I appreciate that you guys, that you all responded, you know, and were willing to join in. And I want to thank the readers in the audience that joined us. And I hope that you all got, you know, something positive from it. As a reminder, Bookshop will be, after this is finished, this broadcast was finished, we'll provide links to all of our books, both on the screen as well as in a follow-up email to everyone who registered. And also, as a reminder, Angela mentioned at the beginning that every book bought through Bookshop directly supports independent bookstores. And I know we all love independent bookstores. They have all been helpful to us in getting the word out about our books and sharing our Latinx stories with all the readers out there who want to share and celebrate our culture and be immersed in it. So once again, thank you all very, very much. Cecilia, Alex, Sergio, and Jen, thank you. It was a real pleasure being with you. And thanks again to everyone for being here today. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy, and everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.